Vaylantz is a complex and difficult deck to learn, especially among rogue decks. Net decking in a combo tutorial is a solid start, but this archetype demands that its pilots strive for mastery in order to find success. So, then why should you play Vaylantz? This archetype is consistent, adaptable, and flexible, and I believe it scales with player knowledge, creativity, and skill. The wide array of potential interactions within Vaylantz are nuanced, requiring you to understand your opponent's cards as well as your own in order to utilize them effectively. This makes Vaylantz a great place for aspiring competitive players with the intent of improving their fundamental Yu-Gi-Oh skills to start collecting and utilizing staples on a budget. If complexity intrigues you, difficulty attracts you, or the low price tag is enticing enough for you to take the plunge, then please, allow me to be your guide to Vaylantz. In order to make this archetype easier to digest, we need to lay down some foundational concepts that hold this deck together. First, Vaylantz is a pendulum archetype. If you don't know how to pendulum summon or how pendulum monsters work, please refer to this video that I wrote for the dual logs. Next, all Vaylantz monsters, with one exception, belong to one of two factions. One full of water spellcasters hailing from Shinra Bansho, and the other of fire machines manufactured in Koenig Weissen. Think of these as two sub-archetypes within the greater archetype of Vaylantz. All main deck Vaylantz have a pendulum scale of 1, and all extra deck Vaylantz have extraordinarily high pendulum scales. In addition to this, all Vaylantz main deck monsters and its in-archetype boss monster, Arctos 12, have two effects. One is an activated ignition effect, and the other triggers upon that monster moving to a different zone. In general, the trigger effects of Vaylantz monsters are better than their ignition effects. Lastly, all Vaylantz monsters can special summon themselves from the pendulum scale, but conditions vary between the low and high level monsters. Level 2 and 4 Vaylantz can special summon themselves as a hard once per turn without any prerequisites, but lock you out of special summoning any non-Vaylantz monsters for the rest of the turn from anywhere except the extra deck. Level 6 and 8 Vaylantz can special summon themselves as a hard once per turn without locking you into Vaylantz, but can only do so if you control a Vaylantz monster of the same attribute or that monster's corresponding field spell is currently in play. The Vaylantz lock is only restrictive when utilizing out-of-archetype cards, and conflicts with cards that special summon monsters from the hand, deck, or graveyard. This lock does not restrict you from special summoning monsters from the extra deck in any way. Now that we've covered the general rules, let's move on to a general explanation of the deck. Now, instead of giving you a card by card where I ramble off the effects of everything in the archetype, I'm instead going to hit the highlights and generalize, since the cohesive game plan these cards form is a lot more important than what each card does individually. First up, we've got the field spells, Koenig Weissen and Shinra Bansho. On activation, these will both place each other into your opponent's field spell zone, ensuring that you always have access to both of them. You may have seen these cards around in other pendulum lists or in one of Jesse Cotton's Crystal Beast decks, but this is their actual home. Shino and solo activation are your access points to your other Vaylantz cards, searching and placing them from the deck. Your movers are Nizuki and Baron, allowing you to trigger the strong effects of your other Vaylantz monsters, and your extenders include Hojo, Viscount, Shinra, Beyond the Pendulum, and Exceed the Pendulum. These cards are used to create bodies, which can then be converted into interactions. Your breakers are Scion and Koenig, which are usually more than enough to clear the field for your starters and extenders to start making plays. And in the extra deck, we have Grand Duke and Arctos, the deck's honorary Pendulum Link monsters. They're fusions, but you'd never make them by fusion summoning. Grand Duke is a Link one that requires a level 5 or higher Vaylantz in the same column as the EMZ. Grand Duke is usually just a placeholder body and an extender, while Arctos is your boss monster and an extender all packed into one. In the side deck, I have a few cards you might include if you're playing in Master Duel, or depending on if the format's back row heavy, and these 3 Vaylantz cards are just not good enough to make the cut most of the time. The main deck cards don't do enough on their own to warrant inclusion, and this is the only actual fusion monster, which is why we don't play it. This deck does not have easy access to a fusion spell, and our in-archetype fusion spell on Hojo's trigger effect isn't good enough since this monster also requires 3 monsters. It's got a really good effect as both an end board piece and board breaker, but it's just a little bit too hard to get to. Now, in contrast to most pendulum decks, this archetype is naturally resilient to disruption due to every card having multiple effects. But due to the lack of a layered in-archetype end board that's common these days, you're forced into either relying on generic cards to fill that gap, or instead lean into the board breaking, going second nature of the archetype by building for either grindy or blind second scenarios. Since Vaylantz lacks its own high scale in the main deck and can play completely without using its normal summon, your desired playstyle is free to inform what cards should fill the remaining half of the deck. Some of the potential supplementary engines are flexible, splashable, and mixable, while others are commanding and dictate the deck building process. I heavily recommend that you try out a few different lists to figure out which playstyle you enjoy, therefore informing the non-Vaylantz cards that you should include in your list. This is an example of one of the grindier lists that Vaylantz can take the form of. The Perform Pals represent a nice conga line of extenders that play really nicely with the Vaylantz cards, providing both scales and a pendulum searching normal summon in Skullcrabat. The end goal is to do just enough going first to keep the opponent from killing you, and bank on your follow-up being enough to either outright kill the opponent or grind them out over the course of a few turns. In contrast, this is a more combo-heavy variant of Vaylantz. These kinds of lists prefer to play solitaire and try to win the game on turn 1, functioning more like FTKs than interactive Yu-Gi-Oh decks. In this example, the Melodious cards give you easy access to Fossil Dyna through use of Gallant Granite. Then, by using a card like Rotten in order to special summon it into the opponent's standby phase, you can almost always guarantee that you're able to floodgate the opponent out of the game while having enough interactions to prevent your opponent from breaking through your board. And last but certainly not least, on the polar opposite of the spectrum, Blind Second Vaylantz prefers to smash through an opponent's board in OTK, taking advantage of powerful breakers and in-archetype going second tools to their fullest. In this example, the Striker package provides both bodies and free draws, allowing you to draw more Vaylantz names, therefore extenders, in order to play through an opponent's disruptions and established board. However, regardless of which variant of Vaylantz you decide to play, these fundamentals will always be true. You'll want to find a way to Shino and then a way to special summon her to the field. In this case, we've started with her, so we'll place her in the scale and use her own effect to summon. We'll then use her activated effect to search for a Vaylantz spell. In this case, we'll grab Solo Activation. We'll then use Solo Activation to scale one of our movers. We're going to grab Nizuki instead of Buster Baron, that way we can get the high level Vaylantz out of the deck. We'll use Nizuki's effect to summon herself and then target Shino in order to move her. Shino will then trigger and then search for another Vaylantz. We're going to grab Hojo. Now we're going to convert the two bodies we have in the field into Beyond the Pendulum and search the high scale of choice out of our deck. I'm using Kaida and Kendo Spirit as a placeholder example, but typically your high scale will be a monster with a good normal summon effect, for reasons I'll explain in a moment. From here, we're going to place Hojo and the Kendo Spirit and Pendulum Summon. We're not going to trigger Beyond's pop since we don't have anything on the opponent's field, and Kendo Spirit's effect in this case is going to activate, returning itself to the hand. We can now use Hojo's effect to summon, and if we had a high scale that didn't bounce itself, we could then use Hojo to return it to the hand and then normal summon it. If you've made it all the way here to the end, I highly recommend that you check out the written guide linked in the description for a more in-depth explanation of each card and supplementary engine the community has found. While there's no way I could cover everything related to Vaylantz in this video, I hope you've gained a solid foundation upon which you can expand by practicing and experimenting with your preferred version of the deck. And if you discover something new, share what you find either here in the comments or in the Vaylantz Discord. If you feel like you learned something or enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate it if you left a like and subscribed. And if you have any questions, I strongly recommend that you leave a comment below. I'll do my best to answer any genuine questions you might have, and maybe even make an addendum video to answer the best and most commonly asked ones. I want to give one last thanks to you, the viewer, and my Vaylantz friends on Discord. This never would have happened without you.